Today's show is sponsored by Old City Coffee. Enjoy free live performances by Curtis Institute students at the Church Street Cafe every Sunday from 3 to 4 p.m. That's Old City Coffee, located on Church Street in Old City and at the Reading Terminal Market, or anytime at oldcitycoffee.com. We're also sponsored today by Mighty Bread Co. Mighty Bread is artisanal bread baked in small batches and naturally leavened. Get fresh bread every week or every other week with a subscription plan. Subscriptions are available for pickup at the Old City Coffee location on Church Street. To sign up, visit mightybreadco.com today. All right, on with the show. Hey folks, welcome to High Res, available on iTunes, Stitcher, and as always, highrespod.com. I'm your host, Ryan Starr. Thanks for downloading, thanks for listening, thanks for sharing with a friend. On today's show, Anthony Tyrone Howard. Anthony describes himself as a creative technologist, and he's been bridging the gap between the two ever since the early part of his career. Anthony's a big comic book fan, and I think you could say our conversation today is very much his own origin story of how he became a creative technologist, going back to his early days looking for a path in college and how he could bring together his two loves, art and technology. We also talk about his work with Creative Tech Works, a STEM program that supports urban students through teaching design and coding. It's a really interesting program, one that Anthony really has a lot of heart for. Another thing he has a lot of heart for is Hop Along Comanche, his self-styled comic book alter ego that came to him through an emotional creative journey and allows him to explore different themes in society and culture. This is a really fun conversation, one I can't wait to share with you. But first, phldesign.co, people. If you listen to the show with any frequency, you've heard me go on and on about phldesign.co. There's no reason you shouldn't have checked it out by now. It's the website that brings together the Philly design and tech community. No matter if you're an art director, UX designer, a student, or a seasoned professional, there's something there for you. Check out the events, job postings, dribble feed of local artists, or the newest episode of High Res right there on the homepage. Check it out today at phldesign.co. And go ahead and do yourself a favor and sign up for the Slack channel as well. There have been some really great heady design conversations in the general channel and a lot of fun nonsense in the random channel. Plus, you can connect directly with some great people, so sign up today at slack.phldesign.co. I wanted to have Anthony on almost from the inception of this show. We worked together very briefly on a project at M. We invited him in to freelance on a new website we were working on for one of our clients, and I just remember his ideas were so fresh and compelling, and in the back of my mind I was like, if I ever get that podcast off the ground, I should have that guy in. And as I started doing the show, his name would come up with other guests from time to time, and so I was really excited to finally get him into the submarine. When I told my creative director I was having him on the show, he said he likes to talk, and Anthony did not disappoint. We started in on comic books and went from there. So let's go now to my conversation with Anthony Howard. Here we go. What are you reading now? What's your...
Really, I'm reading a lot of Marvel. Some of the posts, they had this event, Secret Wars, and all the new comics after Secret Wars I think is a proper reboot for a lot of these books. Like they really did what DC wanted to do with the New 52, which is trying to shake up their mythology. And I don't think they're really that successful. I think what Marvel was doing with like books like Doctor Strange is awesome, which is about really dives into what magic is and is really imaginative. The Vision, which is like a really weird Vision you don't really think about. Mm-hmm. But this new book is kind of set in a new, it's very like a Lynchian sort of exploration of like family and humanity. It's not like a superhero book at all. And the other one is Power Man and Iron Fist, which is like amazing.
I'm not even familiar with Power Man.
Power Man is Luke Cage.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize he was known as Power.
Yeah, that was in the 70s. That's when I started reading books, comic books. They were a superhero team. He was kind of like a blaxploitation, which he's one of the inspirations of my current book, Hop on Comanche, like that blaxploitation era comic book. And that's where he was very much a stereotype, of like the brute, I call it stereotype. Mm-hmm. And he had a book that ran with another character, which was kind of like the kung fu stereotype, where you had a Caucasian like being in the Bruce Lee role, and that was Iron Fist. Right. And then that was the comic. It was awesome. It was like I love that comic. So this new book is almost a revival of that old. It kind of picks up almost exactly like how many years that passed later, and it's amazing. But so that's really what I'm reading now, and a bunch of other stuff I can go on about. Like I'm a voracious comic book reader right now.
Well, so I got a question for you. So, because a lot of our conversation today will focus on like creativity and technology, kind of bridging that gap. Have you used the Marvel Unlimited app?
No, I've been procrastinating. I'm actually, I guess being a child of the early internet, I get a lot of my downloads via PDF or CBZ files, and I don't usually use the bigger apps just because I like the portability of actually having my own books that I can kind of put on my phone or my tablet. But I should, because it's awesome.
It's pretty great.
Yeah, it's like it's no reason why I shouldn't have a subscription.
I got a subscription last year and like just devoured so much over the course of the year.
Can read everything.
And I'm like, and so I want to kind of pick your brain because you brought up Secret Wars. I kind of feel like I missed something. It's very like there's a whole Civil War reboot. There's Age of Apocalypse reboot, and it seems like, and they're all these like battle worlds.
Yeah,
but I'm like, are we going to come out on the other end and kind of not necessarily go back to the way things were, but come to more of a structured like Captain America series and Iron Man series, and
that's a really good question, because that's almost like as I've been being more engaged as a creator, I've been more aware of what's happening in the big two, Marvel and DC, independent books, and how the market is changing, which is parallels other media, music, movies, as far as how it's being affected. And that's also affecting the type of content. So it's almost with the Secret Wars, what I feel that came out of it is, and I wish they would stay there, which is comics that don't have to rely so much on continuity, that are fun, stories that kind of start from one and don't really kind of rely on, and a lot of these books don't rely on the old mainstay heroes like Captain America, and, X-Men are being phased out. You see of like the cinematic universe, and they're really kind of focusing on like smaller characters like Daredevil, which is like, come on, amazing, awesome. And they're really developing books that are really creative and don't fit in constant continuity or predictability that we're used to from like, decades, history of comics.
Well, nor do they rely on you having to read one series and then being related to the other series. Like,
that's been a nightmare. They've had limited success, but the market is so different now. It's, I finally dragged my nephews to the comic book shop, to Fat Jack's, and I think I got them hooked. My daughters, I have two daughters, and they're totally uninterested. I tried every type of way, every, type of book. And, well, it's not true. My youngest daughter loves Scott Pilgrim.
Okay.
But it fits within the millennial, tweeny sort of aesthetic. But the market really is more browsing, freeform. People are finding, comics in bookstores and online. And it's refreshing to have, like, I don't collect books anymore. Like, my comics are in terrible shape. I just throw them in my bag now. And I'm a long-term collector. And I'm starting to realize, like, they should be read like they were in the, 30s and on. Like, just read them, pass them along, let them be wrinkled up, throw them, have them in, lobbies. And, it's the poison of the collector's market is fading away into this new, more independent, friendly, new idea friendly. Like, comics are thriving in content now. It's just the market is a little bit shaky.
Well, that's why I was curious of your take on the whole unlimited subscription plan, because of losing that tactile, hands-on book, that you can just hand off to somebody, versus that disposable digital. I read it, now it's gone, and it's just taking up hard drive space.
Yeah, it's and it's the same thing with books, and I would say even related to radio. It's a medium, each medium adapts. It never fades away. So I think comics are like, I have digital comics, but I also have comics that I like to, I want to go and actually pick them up and read them and thumb through them. And there's really no thought that goes into which one or which direction I go into, but what's available. So if it's easier to get online, I'll download it. If it's easier to if I'm walking past Fat Jack's, I'll grab it. It's really about, comic book stores are kind of in danger. I think they've always been in danger because they relied on a particular sort of distribution model, direct sales. And their place now is, have you heard of the new comic shop in Northern Liberty's Fishtown called Amalgam Comics?
That actually does sound familiar.
It's like a comic bookstore. It's run, I forget her name now, but it's been pretty big. You might have been hearing a lot about it. various news sources.
I don't know where, but it does sound.
Yeah.
I remember someone talking about a news store.
Yeah. I think her model, which is basically like it's a coffee shop that sells comics and collectibles, and it becomes a third space.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the future, like a bookstore. If you can get comics into Starbucks or Joe's, or I think if comics can penetrate and get out of there, I think sadly a lot of the creators aren't internet savvy. Even the modern creators, like a lot of comic book artists they're comic book artists. Like that's what they do. They focus all their energies, and they may have a WordPress page or a Tumblr page, but that probably is the depth of their online savvy. And you have a lot of newer, younger creators that are more adept at social media, that are gaining an audience, that are using the medium to seek out new ways to distribute comics. And I'm kind of exploring different ways to distribute my comic. And
when you jumped into your career, you were digital right off the bat. You were doing Flash animations and you were doing web design. Mm-hmm. And Hopalong Comanche started 2010-ish?
I think officially when it had its name. On a trip to Amsterdam with another artist, which is an interesting time. When I started the book was actually kind of apropos to what was going on in my career. And I kind of ran away to Amsterdam for a little while to get my head together. I was getting over a divorce and things like that. So I found comics, I fell back into it as a way of therapy almost, to purge almost. And then it, became, I probably can do this. I like doing this. I enjoy doing this probably more than I do anything else that I'm working on. And that's kind of...
Well, I was just going to say, do you feel like that was an attempt to reach back to the tactile and do something more hands-on and escape the digital world a little bit?
I think it's the digital, and I think it's just the professional world of a creative. Like, I think my entire adult life, I've been working as a creative in some form of fashion, even since high school.
Where did you go to high school?
George Washington, here in Philly, the Northeast. I grew up in Germantown in my elementary school years, and North Philadelphia in my teenage years. And rather than go to school in North Philadelphia, I was lucky enough to, go to a school that had a decent art program, and I met a lot of the people that I'm still friends with now. My friends, my artistic companions, my brothers. I met them in high school and college.
So you mentioned Luke Cage. What other influences did you have early on?
It's so many. A lot of it really comes from, the basis of the book really comes from my experience working with my friends throughout the years as an artist. Like I've always been fascinated with this kind of brotherhood. Like in the 90s in high school, I did a lot of work for like clubs and like shady clubs, and did flyers and did promotional work. We sold t-shirts and underground magazines. My friend's name is Rob Crawford. He's an amazing artist in New York right now. But we just always did things. We always felt like that's where I started to do comics with him. We co-created comics together.
And this is back in high school?
This is in high school. And so from high school, I kind of fell into airbrush t-shirt design. That was the way I made money throughout college. And I didn't really have a real job until my first daughter was born.
Where did you go to college?
Temple.
Okay.
I started out at Westchester, then I transferred to Tyler, and then I transferred to main campus to become a lawyer, African American Studies. It's a long story.
Wait, I was just gonna say. So what were you majoring in? You were going to Tyler. So what was your focus?
My focus at first was painting and illustration,
and then a lawyer.
Yeah. So it was a weird time because I was trying to find my way. Like I kind of became disillusioned. Like it's like I started thinking about making money and having my own apartment and moving out of North Philadelphia. So I had to start thinking more practically. And I was already an entrepreneur, already was engaged in doing design work at the time, but was more painterly, hands-on, wasn't digital at all. This had to be like around 1999 or so. And I talked to my advisor, and I was like, well, how do I make money as a painter? Like, what's my path? And he laughed in my face. And he's like, you're not going to make any money. You can become a teacher, maybe go to graduate school, but shouldn't be in this to make money. And I was like, okay. So I transferred to main campus to African American Studies and decided to pursue painting on my own time. But along that time, I wanted to do community work anyway, growing up in North Philadelphia. So I thought that'd be a great way to take African American Studies, get into Temple Law, kind of do my art on the side. I had these dreams. And around that time, and I got disillusioned with that really quickly too, because I hated school. I realized that that's not what I wanted to do. So that's when the good old internet, that's when I discovered early web design. I really kind of just took 6 months to train myself in Flash design, and which was new at the time. I was learning director. I took some classes at the Art Institute. Just anything. I got really obsessed with what web design was. And at the time, it really was just HTML and images. And I don't think there was any video at the time. Real Player wasn't available yet, I don't think.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I remember in college, I was like right around 99. I remember learning director.
Yeah, director.
And, I think you could put video in it, but it was cumbersome.
Yeah, it was cumbersome, and there was no way to stream it. And it was...
You had to like embed it in
it was a nightmare, right? It was just
getting it onto a disc.
I mean, it was based around, which I think is a lost art, which I started to collect old CD-ROM interactive games. That they're really great fodder for ideas for mobile games, because you realize that we're really just rediscovering old old methods of creating content. Like, it's just the internet and bandwidth and RAM and all that good stuff kind of caught up with making that content available online. Like.
So when do you think was the first project where you bridged technology and creativity, that you felt you were like, okay, this is something I can pursue? You know?
Yeah, that's I think it was my first. It was really my first job. I was really amazed I even got a job doing, because I was really not trained. I took a few classes here and there.
And at this point, did you have a degree at all?
No, I still have no degree. I've always kind of wanted to go back and forth. And
it's a very interesting time, especially late 90s. I had Kevin Jackson on the show, and he never got a degree either.
Right.
He literally got his first web design job by drawing up a sketch of a web page and sending it to the webmaster of the company he was working for. And the guy was like, why don't you come up here? And like, and I was working in UI and doing design. And we talked about that. That it was just such a strange time. Can you do that now, do you think?
I don't think so. It's not as permeable. Like back then, that was the startup.com days where they were throwing money at. Most of my first few jobs were startups that were just, either they were disappeared immediately after a year. My very first professional job was really, really fun, which was Maristar. And it was indicative of how, like, everyone during that time, there was no reason to get a degree because it didn't exist. I don't think they were multimedia. Our institute had a multimedia program. Tyler was pretty much ignoring it for the most part at that time. Maybe a few years later, they, evolved and went in that direction. But the very first company was me. It was a guy who was pretty much I'm not going to call him out, but he's pretty much a weed dealer who did some maybe club flyers for his friends or did something in Flash, and they hired him. Another guy who was a Renaissance, I don't know what you call the guys that dress up in the Renaissance gear.
Not cosplay, but
yeah.
Okay, sure.
And the owner was
walk around Old City. Okay.
And the owner was a former lounge singer who had an idea to create these animated motivational cartoons to sell to human resources. It wasn't a bad idea, but he had no experience in media, any of this. He just got a bunch of money from some investors, and he had fun, and he made us listen to his lounge music at lunchtime every day. It was a very weird environment, but every company I worked for, I think, was like that. Even Cornell, which was my second professional job, which was amazing time living in Ithaca. Again, collection of people that had no prior experience in web design, or they didn't go to school for anything. They were like artists, or they were a musician, or this guy was in a band and they needed a job in the early 2000s, and it was a great time. It was an amazing time, though. It was
just like fun time. The guy that just said, I hated education, and I ended up at Cornell.
I know. It was, actually, it was. Have you been to Ithaca?
No, I never have. I think my cousin lives up there, but I haven't ever been up there.
Yeah, it's a perfect hippie. Like, if you want to go to retire, like, like if you're a beatnik mathematician programmer, Ithaca is your place to go.
So you spoke about Cornell. How was that influential not only to your career, but also to your opinions on education?
Cornell was it was great. It was a crash course after the first company went under, like a lot of the startups did. They found my resume somehow, and I think Cornell was probably one of my single most influential positions.
What were you doing when you? out there?
Really translating content was really working on the early online courses. So it was for eCornell at the time, and we were digitizing two of their not-for-degree courses, which was the hospitality and management course and their human resource management course. So we basically would work with writers, content writers, textbook writers for that content, and I would translate, and our team would translate that content into interactive content. So into games, into animation. So it was really a good education in how to take a lot of heavy text, and we were really given free reign to interpret it any way that we thought made sense. So if it was, a gowning procedure, like say for FDA, I created a paper doll game where it was important to know how you put on the gown in the correct order. Like there's a very strict way to do it. So the way to translate that to audiences that may not have English as a first language, to people that may have troubles with literacy, we were encouraged to create courses that were user friendly. And that was pre mobile app. So
what time frame are we talking?
This is 2000. I was working there before. I was there when 9/11 happened. So it was 2000, 2001. I was there. I remember, being up there, getting family calling me because they didn't know where Ithaca was. They thought it was New York.
Sure.
So everyone was calling me like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I am so far away from New York City. You have no idea."
So we were talking. You mentioned earlier about the fact that there just weren't degrees
right
then, but now there are. Now
right.
But sometimes I just feel like you hear about some of these programs and they just still seem to be lacking.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's where it needs to be?
Not at all.
Considering like how far into, the internet's here to stay.
Right. Right.
Don't you? I just feel like it should have evolved faster on the educational landscape.
Yeah, I think it's always it's my opinion and what I learned in my time as a creative. The best way to learn I found is working on projects. Like I think the in-class model is very dangerous because if the curriculum doesn't adapt quickly, you're graduating students every 4 years that are pretty much 4 years behind at best, as far as what's the latest technology, what's the current trends, what are the sensibilities, some basics that I think every student, studio classes, design theory, color basics, I think all those are valuable to learn in a studio environment. But once we get to digital, I think how the programs are structured, the legacy way that programs are structured they have to change. I've been pushing over the past few years a more apprentice-based model because I've been concerned about the permeability. Like I fell into it. I don't think someone from my background, from North Philadelphia, artists, if you don't have a portfolio, it's very difficult to get into a position where you can do satisfying work. I think there's ways through like the talent brokerage, the creative groups, things like that.
Well, that's kind of at the heart of what Creative Tech Works is about, right?
Exactly.
Introducing that.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about your involvement in that.
Right. So Creative Tech Works kind of came from a few years prior of doing a lot of community work, nonprofit work. I worked a lot with Jill Scott's Blues Bait Foundation here in Philadelphia. I actually set up a gallery and studio across from the Uptown Theater at her space. And I work, with a variety of, nonprofit programs, after school programs. I would host, parties for local artists, and it became more of like this bohemian sort of hangout space. And I kind of really got the appetite for working with young creative minds. And I realized that there's so much untapped potential, so many different ideas that will never reach the boardrooms or the conference rooms and, the agencies in Philadelphia, New York, and beyond. So after working with, Jill Scott's Foundation for a few years, I've made some connections, and I started working with CCB Moore Foundation in North Philadelphia, which is pretty much like the community building heart of North Philadelphia. And they hosted, I had an idea for a program, really was just kind of based around my ideas of, again, a studio approach to design and advertising, partnered with Dr. Jamie Bracey, who is the director of STEM education at Temple. Mm-hmm. So I got an opportunity to work with Temple again and bring my alma mater into the program. It was basically me finding 22 students that had to either go to high school in North Philadelphia or had to live in North Philadelphia didn't necessarily have to be taking design or art classes. A lot of the children did come from a STEM program, so they had background in coding. And I wanted to see if I can kind of take just random kids. Some had, privileged backgrounds. They go to math classes and tutoring and basketball classes, and some kids who really are struggling and don't know what they want to do, and figured out a way to put them in teams, to separate them out in the teams. If you, Creative Tech Works, if you go to their website, creativetechworks.org, you'll see the logo is 4 quadrants, and it's really based around how a typical agency, if not the direct structure, but organizationally, mentally, how it's organized. You have the copywriters, you have the creative team, the art directors, you have the sales account team, you have the more of the management executive team, and then a few weeks of finding out what the kids were passionate about, I would filter them into those different teams, and they would work as a group, as teams, have team meetings. And the result of the first year was the development of a racing app that pretty much we documented all the historical landmarks in North Philadelphia, and they turned that into an Ingress. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that app, the gaming app. How about the new Pokemon app, like the augmented reality app? It's basically like it's basically a way. It was basically an Amazing Race based app where the participants downloaded an app on the phone that the students developed and branded and marketed. They came up with a name. They went through the entire creative process from wireframing to copywriting to editing to testing to everything.
So they built it and marketed it.
Built it, marketed it, hosted the events. Pretty much everything that was involved in the program.
Now wait, so there were different teams. Now were they all doing the same project, or were they
all working on the same
project,
right? But
different iterations of it?
Well, actually, they're all working on the same. We're working on the development of an app and the branding and the marketing around the app, and the branding and marketing of pulling off an event to launch said app. So each of the teams had different responsibilities. All of them had initial responsibility for the development of the concept of the app, and then they broke off into, so for instance, the copywriting team broke off. What was the language going to be around our ads, our social media, our what's the script for our commercials? They went to their group. The art directors developed the the look and feel, and then even that creative group had to break off into UI, and that other group had to break off into who are more adept at just creative marketing design. Some students were better than others in that. I had my students who just wanted to code.
How did you figure that out? I mean, you did say some of the kids already might have known how to code or were in a STEM program, but you said some were just kind of happened to be, at a loose end and show up at the program.
It was
how
really
did they
much
find their way.
It was as I went. It was really much an experiment as we went. It really just worked out. It was a theory.
Did they dip their toes in like copywriting and then maybe slide over to marketing?
Some kids, like everyone. So like we would have joint exercises. Like everyone knows how to wireframe. Like everyone knows how to do everything up until where their experience dropped off. So if some students didn't know Photoshop, every student that knew everything up until Photoshop would learn how to develop the idea, wireframe it, kind of move it through pre-development. And then when they get to a drop off of, do you want to learn Photoshop? Not really. I kind of want to either learn coding. I think that's more interesting to me. Or maybe I want to kind of be on the marketing team. I want to help put together the event. I want to, do that thing. So it was more or less listening to the students. I was working very intimately with them like every weekend. And we also had a studio day throughout the week that they would voluntarily come into and, further develop the project.
Over how long?
Over a year.
Okay.
We started, actually, it was a little bit shy of a year, probably more closer to 9 months development time. But it was really my theory of working in creative spaces and working with teams, working here at places like M. Good examples of healthy creative environments where the creatives do feel empowered and they thrive, and it does have that sense of family. I really just stole all that and said, okay, well, if I think that would work. My theory was it would work with anyone. I can kind of grab 22 people off the street and I can find out what they're passionate about, and I can find a place for them in advertising. So the success of that, the success of building the app, the success of the event We had pretty good press. Philadelphia Weekly, the mayor's office was, we was for the kids and their confidence was a success. And a lot of the students I keep in contact with now, a lot of them, I'm pretty sure in a couple of years their income will surpass mine. They have their own companies. But what was important for me, for students that came up in an area that I came up in, very poor in North Philadelphia, and kind of going into ideas of diversity and how the industry can expand into diverse places, not simply on the basis of race, which, you can make an argument for or against. I think it's just diversity of ideas. If you pull people from different backgrounds, you'll have better advertising. You'll have better design. You'll have divergent thoughts. It's just the nature of creative spaces, whether it be an advertising agency or a studio or a band working together, is you form a brotherhood of trust. You form a brotherhood of, I can express myself around these people. And with open and honest and motivated and excited people, you can make magic with any combination of people, with any combination of product or any combination of idea. I think the industry needs to work. I guess it's a long about way to kind of answer your initial question. I think the industry can work more on what are they doing to, not just for the diversity's sake, but to make our industry more rich. Bring in more unlikely voices. Most of my heroes, my design heroes, the George Loises, the people like that are rebels. And I think this industry always thrives when you have divergent thinkers. What we do is so influential and important to beyond what we do for brands, for culture, for society. Like we're everywhere, So I think the more people that have access to it, that are aware that they even have to go back to one thing, I think the thing that I did learn from the students was they didn't understand that advertising, that media have creators. Like, it's so invisible.
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah.
So you mentioned in an email you wanted to talk about Edward Bernays and
right.
his influence on you. I'm going to read you a quote here.
Sure.
Because it's kind of speaking to what you're saying.
Right.
He wrote, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is true ruling power of our country." Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what you're speaking to as far as like that manipulation and like that control that advertising can have.
Yeah, and I think, I fell in love. Initially I was more of a designer, and I think along the way, getting more opportunities to work in marketing and branding, like fell in love with advertising and how it worked and its influence. And Edward Bernays, I think I discovered him through a YouTube link and was just fascinated by the story of a guy who, I guess call the father of public relations, the father of how we do things now. And with all that said, advertising still has this negative, maybe deservedly so, in some instances, maybe not, reputation of being junk, of being, throwaway, being, interruption to media, when really media, as we know it, works, it's kind of advertising responsible for where we are now, for television, for radio. My thought is that advertising can use those same tools for anything it wants. It doesn't have to be for manipulation, for scary things like controlling the public mind, which Edward Bernays is famous for, kind of molding the way that we have political discourse, which you can see in this current,
Yeah, well, it's funny just like reading his like quotes and his writing.
Donald Trump playbook.
It's dark. It's dark stuff. Yeah. Like he didn't have a very positive view of it.
Right. But it's a tool.
But you certainly see, for sure, certainly in the political climate now.
Yeah.
Like that statement I just read. If you look at like the news organizations, Fox, CNN, the way they control what we're ingesting,
right.
is they are the arbiters of what we take in.
Right. And I think with that said, I kind of feel we're not too far into the internet, into digital, to really fully grasp like how it's changing culture. And I don't think we really can see the effects directly at this moment. I think we're living in an age like the 60s, like something that's really like a lot of things are really going on. Things are changing, but we're in it. And we really won't be able to kind of have any perspective about it until like 20 years later. But I see it now with my daughters, how they communicate, how everyone is linked in, how everyone is, it's this craving for personal connection, for privacy is becoming a delicacy online.
How do you think Edward Bernays would react to Twitter?
I think because he's from a different age, I think he wouldn't quite get it. I think he would try to use it like how it's being used now. Again, it's effective now. I just think, I have a teenage daughter and there are always 5 social media apps ahead of me. So I never know, like it was Snapchat and then now, then it was Kick. Then there's always, kids are so amazingly adept. Yeah, Kick is the new thing parents are watching out for. It's a messaging app. But kids navigate this space in a way where it's undoubtedly is going to change how they'll develop as adults. We're already seeing it now, and how they look at fame and how they look at their identities online versus personal identities. So Edward Bernays, and I think to a lot of extent, a lot of the old Madison Avenue-esque leftover ideas, I think some of that stuff is very awesome. Like the creative model is great. But I think advertising has been defined by its distribution model, like along the lines of, if all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. I think there's room for agencies. Like I was joking the other day, I think I would work for, the agency I would want to work for if it established itself tomorrow would be either Kim Kardashian's advertising agency, Kanye West, or anyone who's really good at social media right now. Because I think those are the agencies of the future. I think those are really agencies that kind of embrace non-advertising. I think the reliance on commercials, like commercials are, no matter what we do to commercials, the internet is trying to destroy them and get rid of them. Like everything, the internet is like, it's like, like the commercials are the virus and, Netflix and on-demand media is the, antibodies trying to root out traditional models. So what my thing is, my interest now is, okay, what's next? Like advertising doesn't go away. It has to morph and adapt. What does it become? And my theory is that it just kind of, it rolls back to content. I'm not alone in that, content marketing, but I really do think it's going back to, if you have a product to sell, if you have something to sell, if you want to fuel capitalism and you want to move forward in digital media, how do you create opportunities for engagement, which is important for people, for connectedness, for shared experience, cute commercials, cute creative, I think they'll always, it'll have a place somewhere, but I don't think as the main model. So
I feel like storytelling is, definitely the almost like mini documentary model of it. It's not a commercial. It's just like a glimpse into someone's life or into an experience.
Right.
And that definitely seems to be the stuff that lately resonates, at least more with me.
Yeah.
Especially online content, because you can tell those more long form stories. You're not, beholden to a 30-second or 1 minute time constraint.
Right. I think YouTubers are showing us the way as well. The future of media, especially the next generation that have really mastered how to monetize their podcast and especially through YouTube.
Not this one.
I mean, it's a transition. I mean, I think your podcast from it's the life cycle of a lot of how these huge channels start organically.
I don't put any work into it.
Oh, right.
At least monetizing.
Okay.
I don't put any work into monetizing it. But
it's a viable. It's actually the point where it's a my oldest daughter who's in college now. She has a YouTube video cast, and working with her and her marketing, trying to figure out how to monetize and get more hits and viewers. Like I find that all very fascinating, and I do and I do see that's where it's going. Like YouTube is the largest social media network. It's not viewed that way. It's viewed as content, but it's really.
No, I think the running joke right now is that there are all these YouTube stars that you've never heard of.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like that's the thing right now, and maybe that's our generation just kind of talking down to YouTube.
Well, that's a big part of it too. It's my conversation with my contemporaries, other old married guys and things like that. We tend to think because we don't see it that it doesn't exist. Especially now, there's so many micro pockets and micro cultures and there's so many things happening now that we're just we age out. Like we're not aware. We don't make ourselves aware because we're not, like I said, having teenage daughters it keeps me grounded to a further extent, taking in apprentices, younger guys, 22-year-olds. Like I try not to work with anyone over 30. Don't trust anyone over 30, and I'd be the only old guy in the studio or the office. I prefer story, and I prefer narrative. I prefer video. I believe the internet's going to become mainly video just because of bandwidth. And like I said, 2000s when I started, it would be unthinkable that we would have something like a Netflix now, much less a YouTube.
I think even like 5 years ago.
Yeah, science fiction.
To think that Netflix would be what it is with taking it back to comics, the fact that Daredevil and Jessica Jones and all these shows and House of Cards, releasing full seasons. Mm-hmm. That model alone, I think, would just blow people's minds. Maybe not 5 years ago, but certainly 10. Yeah, I mean, it's leaps and bounds, and it gets its folds on itself.
One of the things I taught my students to kind of bring them into having a passion about media and a passion about advertising, trying to find different hooks for them, is the life cycle of the iPhone. I kind of take them through, the creation of the iPod and how the emergence of one thing, like a TED Talk, leads to an inventor coming up with the multi-user interface. That multi-user interface gets purchased by Microsoft. Microsoft kind of develops further technology. From there, Apple adapts that, and they come up with their first iPhone, which is the first modern day smartphone. And it's from one idea seen online, inspiring other developers, other designers. And that's kind of the nature. The developer community is the fertilizer of the internet. Like those guys, kind of behind the scenes guys, behind the scenes creators, constantly connected, constantly building, rebuilding. Yeah, I think that's, a new industry that's kind of more based on collaborative, organic models versus top-down tiered models, like creative director on down. Is kind of where I guess I'm getting at.
Well, Hopalong Comanche kind of is a commentary on the current social landscape and media landscape.
Right.
You describe it as the effect that the cult of fame, the rise of memes, and the march of technology is having on society's evolution. How did you develop this concept for the comic?
It's a long-running concept. It started with one of my art directors at Cornell, Michael Myers, who's actually he's a graffiti artist, a pretty in underground circles, pretty well-known graffiti artist. Chance. On our lunch breaks, we would drive around Ithaca, hang out, talk. And he would take me on his bombing missions. And we just had a brainstorming session one time about what if I had, a comic book. We could do a comic book as graffiti and kind of graffiti a comic book all around the world. And you had to read panels by going to like Paris to read part 2. And then you had to go to, Australia to read part 3. And so those were the initial ideas. So
and what year was this?
This was 2001. We're the initial seed, but didn't have a name.
It doesn't feel that unrealistic now because the internet's made the world that much smaller.
Yeah, exactly.
2001 it seemed a little bit more outlandish, but in 2016 it's like that could almost exist now.
Well, it's actually a lot of those ideas are the technology has caught up with them, so I'm incorporating them now into the book 2, book 3, and so on. But it really solidified during a trip to escape, I would say, to Amsterdam with a creative friend of mine. I think I mentioned earlier, Rod Crawford. And he was a painter at the time, and I was kind of like his roadie. I kind of like mounted canvases, made sure that he had, champagne, made sure that the models, were taken care of, things like that. Making sure everyone was up on time after being hungover from previous night's party. Like I was really like an art roadie, and it was really a great time. And one night of partying and mushroom trip, I came up with the name. The journey of that trip really was the basis of the idea for Hopalong Comanche. The raw material, like the first black and white comic I came up with, were made from pages I made while I was under the influence. So for me, it was almost the trip. For me was a escape from my professional life, kind of working in agencies, and I was getting kind of bored and kind of disillusioned, with what I was doing at the time. So being able to kind of cut loose and kind of live as an artist for a few years while I freelance off and on in Amsterdam was where the genesis for, and a lot of the ideas for Hopalong Comanche were developed.
What is your biggest influences when it comes to your illustration style?
Parliament Funkadelic album covers.
Okay.
Early comic books, and like karate movies. Like those three things, probably the things that really made. I mean, they're always in my head. Like 80s pop culture. Like ask me anything about like 80s cartoons. Like I have a brain full of just being a latchkey kid sitting in front of the television and drawing comic books and listening to records.
Are we talking like Transformers, G.I. Joe?
Transformers.
Mask.
Mask.
Mask is the one that doesn't get brought up enough.
I know the theme song, Bionic 6. Like any obscure meatball and spaghetti. Like you can go into any cartoon that I can squeeze in on a Saturday. That's why I think my heart goes out to media is so prevalent now. Like kids can just kind of pull up any cartoons on Netflix. But in the 80s and the late 70s, you would cereal and
we had those Saturday morning schedules in our heads. Like we were like, I know if I switch from here, I could go from Spider-Man to Garfield.
Exactly, between commercials.
Yeah, exactly.
And I had a little brother, so it was the remote negotiations were a little tense at times, but it was a ritual. Like it was kids. Then we had our own world, I think, and I miss that for my daughters. I miss that. I mean, they're connected now in a different way. But the idea of, you would, after Saturday morning cartoons, you really did have a schedule. Your friends would meet at the comic book shop at a certain time. No texting, no phone call. Like this is the time that we meet. And from there, we ride our bikes and we would explore the city all day, then come home and our parents would kind of ask us what our day was, but we would have our own life away from our parents.
I'm just getting to the point now where I'll not peek out every single time my daughter goes down the street on the bike. She's 9.
It's difficult.
Really tough,
It's really, and I really do. And I'm like, I feel like a hypocrite. I'm like, I really like. We just live in a different world. And I wonder.
Well, do we?
Do we? Yeah. Do we live in a different world? Are we more hyper?
That's
really what's at the top of my mind. There is like, are we just more afraid? Like has the 80s and the years of Reagan and terror, like have we just become a more fearful society? Is it so bad?
Can you look at a panel van and not go,
well,
that guy's going to steal my kid. I better get out there.
My daughters do have my daughters have an ongoing, it's an uncomfortable joke, but they say, oh, it's a white van. And it's from years of, I'm like, oh man, I've made my kids neurotic about white vans.
Yeah.
But it was like the thing, like, anybody asks, offer you candy if you're in a white van. So now it's like in their psyche, like, not to trust. And it's kind of, it's at the root of it is not to trust. But you kind of, as a parent, you kind of don't want them to trust
for me,
anyone,
When I was a kid, it was a blue van. There was this at the bus stop. I was like, see that blue van? It was probably some painter.
Yeah.
They just
especially if it was airbrushed. If you had an airbrush motif on your van, definitely stay away from any van that had a mountain motif.
Oh, I thought the creepier ones were the ones that were just the plain color. But
yeah.
I think you should have to register them before guns.
Oh, right. Right.
Don't register guns.
Like, why do you...
We need to know where you are at all times.
The question is, where do you even get those anymore? Like...
the guy down the street from me has one. Yeah.
Like, you have to go out of your way to get a van, like an old style van,
Well, it's funny though, and your kids are a little older now. Mm-hmm. My daughter, I introduced to those old school Inspector Gadget,
yes.
And she binged them. And the old school Garfield too.
Mm-hmm.
Like she just binged them, and she loves them. It still appeals to the kids, but
they're timeless. Yeah. It's like in my generation, I was watching Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse. I don't even remember that one. You ever hear that?
No.
It was the first.
It was a cartoon, or
it was a cartoon. It was based on it's Bob Kane who created Batman. It was a Batman-esque parody. It was Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse for Batman and Robin, and it was the first cartoon. Like it was a challenge between me and my friends to get up first, who could see the very first cartoon that would come on. So
was this like in the time of Underdog? Hours Underdog. So I remember Underdog was like a 5:30, 6 o'clock. It was
in that time period. It was when they had the puppet shows. I forgot the names of them. Like the Flash Gordon Filmation series was one of the first ones on, like at 5:30. So again, there was a time I could pop up and my parent, my mom would be asleep and I can just kind of like go into the kitchen. It was like, again, our own world. It was a shared experience that I had with everyone in the neighborhood. Again, I'm not sure, again, with conversations like these, again, being older, you kind of like, are they losing or are they gaining? Like, am I even in a position to be able to judge honestly because of my background?
I don't know that it goes back to what you were saying earlier about being too close to it now.
Yeah.
You can't step back. You can't step back enough to be able to tell. They're going to have their own experiences.
Right.
They're going to look back fondly on. Remember when we could binge watch My Little Pony?
Exactly.
Is Magic.
You remember Netflix?
Yeah, you remember Netflix?
Wow. Right.
We're like, we used to have this thing called VHS has become, or I had to walk 5 miles to get to school.
Yeah.
I used to have to rewind my videos.
Yeah.
What's your medium of choice?
That's very interesting. It's where I am now in my career after being I'm 42 now. I've spent 20 plus years kind of being a creative, creating for money. And, I have this tool set that includes like flash design development, art direction, and illustration, and all these fun things that I can do. And I've always regretted never having the time to really do them. And I felt like in my professional life, I always had to prioritize, make time for my book. So I decided to live a life of, my 5-year plan now, just for the next 5 years, it's just, I want to do everything. So my year has been structured to work around a few different mediums in particular, illustration and graphic novel work, of course, to get that hands-on painting, illustration. I get my fingers dirty. I'm very interested in C# and game design, working in Unity 3D, developing a STEM-based game around Hopalong Comanche now, just for myself, just something I wanted to learn, and it's turned into a bigger project.
Oh, you actually used the word retire. You're going to say, I'm retiring.
Retiring from, are you a fan of Mad Men? Like, I just kind of cliche to everyone, sure. But it's that episode where, why I quit cigarettes.
Sure. The essay that he writes.
Yeah, that's kind of like, I've been kind of on the line of writing something like that for advertising. Like, I love advertising, but at the same time, I felt like where I am creatively, I've hit a wall as far as what I want to do. I still like to do things for brands, but I like to exist as in a different form. Like freelancer really doesn't describe it, because freelancer denotes that I would be working on client projects most of the time and working on my projects the other part of the time. So I've kind of simplified it as I'm an artist that works in multiple mediums, that sometimes I take commissions from clients and brands. So that gives me the flexibility to put my projects first to, so my mediums, again, go back, it would be illustration. I'm very interested in expanding like my coding skill set for what it allows me to create digitally. And music, I'm kind of getting back into music and how to incorporate that back into my other projects.
What's your connection to music?
From my early days of design, everything I did was for clubs, nightclubs. I was a club kid. Spent a lot of time in Shampoo. If anybody out there remembers like big in house music in the late 90s. I even was, again, with my creative partner, Rob Crawford, we had a fanzine called Phil, which is basically like we just kind of covered house DJs and, followed them around clubs and kind of just partied a lot, sold t-shirts and, graffitied up, whatever we could. So being in that environment, working with DJs, and I've always been around music. I've always, come from a family of artists and musicians. And,
do you play anything?
A little guitar. I'm mainly like a lyricist singer. Like always kind of like words and building and creating a story. So I dibble dabble here and there. We've made albums. We've made albums that just me and my friends have copies of, things like that. And working with musicians as a designer, like with Will Downing, Joe Scott, a few other artists that I kind of just did design. And I've always worked in music and worked with musicians like throughout my career, and just always been a fan of music. And Hopalong Comanche, really, each of the characters in it represent a different genre of music. They're all icons for different musical forms. So,
do you have a favorite character within Hopalong Comanche?
It's hard because they're all kind of they're all me, and they're me or some person that I love or that I was influenced by.
Well, you once referred to Hopalong Comanche as your alter ego. What can Hopalong Comanche say that Anthony can't?
I don't know. The line is being blurred as I'm getting older now. I feel like Anthony Howard is a little bit more unrestrained than Hopalong Comanche is. I think it's more of Hopalong Comanche.
I feel like you're more unrestrained than your character.
Yeah, I think Hopalong Comanche is a representation, like is almost like a freeze in time to where I was working in the agency, working with other people as a creative. And it initially started out as just a comic about me and my best friend. And arguing over girls and, that experience in the early club scene. It just kind of documenting that because it was such an important time in my life. And then it kind of morphed into, other characters started to come out of it, and the band was formed, and the comic book is almost kind of like an organic expression of where I'm at, maybe 5 years behind wherever I am now. So initially he did start out as like an avatar for me, and he was based on me. My daughters kind of, they almost grew up with Hop Along now. I guess they're sick of hearing about it.
It's interesting you describe it that way, though, because talking about the distance, the distance between you and a time period, that you would describe him as being 5 years behind you. Yeah. Because you have that distance and you have that perspective that when you go back to him, you could kind of relate to him in a different way than were you writing something more like, this is who I want to be, versus like, this is who I was. Right.
Like, it's basically like he's an avatar for me in the sense of, when you're working closely with a friend, especially if you guys are competitive and I think the best partnerships are rivalries. Like you have a little bit of that Reggie and Archie sort of tension to drive each other forward. And if you work with someone, I've worked with, Ra and various other friends, like for multiple years, from high school on. So by the time I became an adult, was decades. And through that, you build a rapport. Like you learn a lot about yourself. You learn about your ego working in groups as a creative, and how out of control it can become, how jealousy works, how artists are hard on themselves, just everything about the creative experience. I wanted to kind of document in a book and kind of tell that story and tell who I was in a particular time in a relationship with my friends and with myself. So the books that are coming up now are really I'm a little bit nervous because then the first book was very general, introduced the characters, and then now I'm getting into those stories that friends of mine will look at and say, I know who you're, that's me.
What was the most unique reaction that people had to the book?
Honestly, I didn't slap a mature reader's stamp on it on my first book. And I really intended it to be for young adults and adults. But I have this habit of, I catch the train a lot and I sketch incessantly on the train. So over time, I built up a following of high school students. Since our schedules would link up to school being let out. So I guess my on the train, on the Orange Line, kids would talk about, this guy, he's drawing comic books. And one of the students on the train approached me to speak at her school as a keynote speaker, just from, again, being introduced to my comic, running into her on the train. I was surprised because, number one, I was like, well, did you send this book to your teachers? Like, are they okay with this book? Because it has sex and it has, other stuff that I'm not quite sure how it works nowadays with, I'm out of touch. I found out that one of her teachers was a colleague of mine who I worked together with on the Creative Tech Works program. So I was kind of welcome in. They kind of they didn't really kind of pay attention too much about the nudity. I guess I was surprised once I did the speech in front of the auditorium full of kids and I showed actual pages. I kind of skipped around the nudity and things like that. It was when I realized that I think I have a market more so with kids who are finding the book and it's something they're not supposed to read, that it's something that's taboo. And at first I was resistant to that. And I was like, the selfish artist came out like, well, it's not my job to police what these children read. I read inappropriate things. I saw The Exorcist when I was in elementary school. Right. So
it's
maybe you should have it.
You can't pick your audience. Yeah. And you also, and you can't also pick how they interpret it. Right. Like you can do your best as an artist to guide them in a direction, but at the end of the day, it's like they're going to take it and they're going to derive some meaning out of it that might not have been where you were going, but was something that they found in it. Right. So talking of that perspective with book 2 coming out, what would you say are the themes in book 2 now?
I think book 2 is more refined. I try to make them better, the art. I'm very new to writing. I've always been an artist, but I have an immense respect for copywriters and writers in general. Like it's such the idea of constructing a world and a story and bringing people into it with words and prose. And, I'm really learning a lot. I really think words are magic. I think that's what spells are. Like you're spelling. I think the initial spells were just sentences. They were just, I'm I'm writing something into existence. I'm writing a story. I'm writing this Bible, this religion. It's all based in words and passing stories along and in language. So to me, that's been the richest thing I've been like learning and experiencing doing this book. So,
how many more books do you think you have in you?
I'm nervous to say it out loud, but I think it'll help me commit to it, because everyone that I know knows this. This is what I'm committing to. One of my favorite books is Cerebus the Aardvark. Have you heard of this? No. Dave Sims is an underground book. It's usually sold in bookstores. It's an epic, but it was started in the early 70s. The late 70s. And the author, Dave Sims, committed to make 300 issues of this book. Like, he wanted it to be his life's work, his memoir of everything that's in him in graphic novel form. So it was, it was revolutionary for his time. It's up there with Dark Knight and all the kind of great comic book works that have been created, Will Eisner. So I'm not as ambitious. 300 issues is a lot with one person. So I've committed to 100 issues as my life's work to tell this story. I've been trying to ramp it up to have more than one. Last year was slow. I had one issue out. I'm hoping to get out 4 this year and hopefully get better, bring on other artists. One of the aspects of the book that I don't talk about as well is that it's totally Creative Commons. Anyone who wants to create Hopalong Comanche stories is free to, if they feel inspired, any element, any character, and all they have to do is provide attribution. Like, just say that it was created by Anthony Tyrone Howard. Other than that, you can go ahead and make money with it, do what you want with it. And
you're talking about completely separate from what you're doing.
Right. I mean, or not. Like, that was part of the initial experiment. It's like, what if, another guy created an entirely new Hopalong Comanche series? How would it exist in my world? Could it work together? It depends on, by opening it up to, I think copyright is, again, one of those things that have to be reviewed, that are, I wouldn't say throw it out altogether, but I think to a certain extent it does hamper creativity in this age where things are so pop. YouTube and these restrictions are not giving us what we probably could be enjoying right now, because people are so concerned about being sued or not even being able to get it posted. I think more artists opening up their copyright, this making it more available to like musicians to make, let DJs remix them without any threat of legal consequences, things like that. So I think I'm doing my part to not be a hypocrite and kind of contribute to like a lush artistic future and environment, I guess. So at least I think so.
What was the last thing to inspire you?
Wow.
It doesn't even have to be artistic or like in an artistic realm, but just inspire you walking down the street.
Actually, my grandmother. One of the things about Cleveland, a new sort of lifestyle that's not so reliant on clients and 9 to 5, is kind of creating a work-life balance is talked about a lot. And again, working in design, digital advertising, it's intensive. It's labor intensive. A lot of late nights. I think a lot of people do a really good job of doing that work-life balance, save the weekends for work. But I think I found that once I had more time for family, it was, family filled that space once the time was available. So my grandmother is ill. She has kidney problems now, but she's an old, I call her old horse. I think she's faking most of the time. Very strong, very opinionated. I get a lot of my energy and my drive and my confidence from my grandmother. She co-raised me. So now during the day, during my studio time, I take care of, I'm her primary care provider. So I would take her throughout the day. So she's almost a part of my studio, like my artistic life. Like, I'm talking with her every day, and she's giving me information from decades ago, just of how music and how people were, and her time in the Deep South. She was born in a tobacco shed, for God's sake. I don't know anyone who was born in a tobacco shed. And so for her, like, being with her every day now, when I was professional, like, I really didn't have time. I really didn't have a lot of time for my grandmother, and I would always be very cognizant of, again, going back to the idea of stories, those stories that I grew up on that I'm telling secondhand. My grandmother told my mother told me. I can go back and talk to my grandmother. Like, I have very healthy people in my family, so I can speak to a lot of the elders that are still around, but the clock is ticking. How do I preserve those stories? How do I, keep those stories alive for my children, my grandchildren? So being around her strength, this woman raised, like 7 kids, and yeah, she's my biggest. It sounds corny and hokey, but people, family, like that's where I get a lot of my energy and my inspiration from. Movies and stuff like that are great. I think that they're great for surface visual stuff now for me. Like they're good food. Like I watch a lot of movies and I consume a lot of media, but for the things that are important in what I'm creating moving forward, I need more raw material that comes from a real place. That comes from exploring family and stories that are related to self and self-exploration. Because the more I know about myself, I can be more empathetic. I can connect with a viewer, or if I'm creating a game, a player, or if a painting, audience member. So,
speaking of movies,
mm-hmm.
we're talking 5 years from now.
Okay.
Hopalong Comanche becomes a film or a Netflix 12-episode series.
Yeah.
Who's playing them?
Kenna. I already thought about this.
Of course you have.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like all these movies, all this. I fear. I was on a podcast, the Black Tribbles podcast, last year. It was about these new, Flash and this explosion in comic book movies and media, and I was very cynical. I was very much like, what should they cut it out? And it was really and I examined it was from a fear of they're going to oversaturate. Like there's so many comic book movies coming out. By the time I get to my book, people will be so sick of comic book movies. I'll miss my window, but I figured that was just selfish and
but you're missing the thing about the comic book movies now.
Yeah.
I think so. The day we're recording this, Batman vs. Superman just came out
right.
this past weekend. It was largely critically panned, but there's just so much of that oversaturation I also feel symptomatic of just doesn't feel original.
It's not, yeah.
Where, yours would feel original because it's not on everyone's lips.
Yeah, I mean, if you really look at movies, past couple decades, there have been so many comic book movies that really weren't advertised as such. The industry does a really bad job of like cross-branding. Like you never see a comic book advertisement in any of these movies. I haven't seen them yet for the movies I've seen. Like for a comic book shop or for their online store, like very aggressively. At the time, I was very much, I mean, you can see it coming. Like it's every genre from Westerns on, like it's a cash grab. So they're saturating the market. You only can get so big. Like how much bigger can you get than like Superman versus Batman, Civil War? There's just really it's just an amusement park ride. Like the budgets become so inflated, the expectations become so inflated that it affects the content. That I think smaller experiments like what's happening over at Netflix with Daredevil I think that's preferable. I want more of that, less of these big budget, sure to be flops, like critically flops. Like they're just candy marketing department control. They're not organic. And the other thing, the point that I made was that it made me reexamine whether or not movies are, are comics exist best in their own medium. It made me realize that comics really do stand apart like jazz and hip hop as its own original things. Like comics are not movies. Comics are not storyboards for film. Because we tried it with Watchmen. We tried it with, and we're like, all right, it doesn't work because you're missing a lot of elements that are present in comics as far as distortion of time, suspension of disbelief within this world this paper that you're looking at the time. So I'm looking for more of a balance, more smaller, quieter movies with smaller budgets that allow for diverse stories that aren't the cash cows for multi-conglomerates, and more cross-branding, more awareness to the general public that these comics exist, that there are more stories. Like Civil War that we were talking about earlier, like if that ever hit film just for the richness of the depth of lore and story, but we're far away from studios, I think, taking a chance. Civil War, I think, is the closest that we've come to that nuance, but they spent so much time investing their model. Marvel's in a model of building a world. Their cinematic universe is a lot different from DC's, which is like, they did it. Now we have to hurry up and throw something together.
It feels very reactionary.
Exactly. And I think that's going to be when it starts straws to break the camel's back. I think Superman versus Batman, maybe a few of these down the line, we're going to get another, Batman and Robin, and then that'll be enough. And people will say, enough for now. Thank you, but no thank you. Comics will go back to being comics again. We'll have a few smattering of exceptional comic book movies making the screen, but then it will fall into whatever the next cinematic trend is. And, it's just a cycle.
Being a fan of Power Man, Luke Cage from the very beginning, what was your take on the interpretation of Jessica Jones?
I love Jessica Jones. I mean, it had its faults just from a, storytelling. I mean, I think it's binge watching as an experiment as well. Like, it's a different experience watching that all at one time over a weekend. I thought the writing was awesome. I thought the introduction to these other characters I thought was awesome. Luke Cage, there's often, as a, African-American creator, I'm kind of pulled into different discussions related to different media that I'm associated with. And one of them is comics and diversity in comics. Luke Cage is very much born out of an area of, they don't want to kind of forget about, but he, over the years, through Marvel's writing of him, investing him and Black Panther into their stories and actually investing in who they are as human beings, made very rich characters that now you kind of can take to these new mediums and they make sense. I was on a Facebook comment section and I was debating with a few people about upcoming Wonder Woman, and a few of bloggers kind of mentioned that it was no diversity in Wonder Woman. And my reaction as a comic book fan first was, I don't remember any characters of color in Wonder Woman, and I really wouldn't want them shoehorned in there for the sake of diversity unless they were important to the story. And so it was an argument about some characters that existed in the 70s, and some people pulled out a character called Nubia and Philippus, and at least one of those characters were like Luke Cage, a throwaway 70s reactionary to, embarrassingly written diversity character that they really didn't put a lot of effort and thought into and never really revisited. The fact that they're revisiting Luke Cage now in new books, I think that's the type of diversity I want. But a lot of that stuff is happening in a lot of these newer books because the creators are younger. They're more diverse. They're from, they're coming from Brazil, and a lot of the BRIC nations now are generating more creators. So you're getting that diverse art, diverse background. Jason Aaron, you heard Jason Aaron, the comic creator, and his work. I'm drawing a blank on his book now, but around Native Americans and their stories. I think we're really in a great time in comic books on a few different levels, from diversity to content to what mediums we can see the books translated into.
Anthony, it was great having you on.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome. Appreciate it.
All right, people, there you go. Thanks so much to Anthony Howard for coming on the show. Check out his website, anthonytyronehoward.me, and you can find out how you can get your hands on Book 2 of Hopalong Comanche. You can also follow him on Twitter at ATHArts2022. HighResPod.com is where you're going to want to go to see the work we talked about on today's show, as well as catch up on past episodes. Subscribe to the show on iTunes so you never miss a future episode, and while you're there, leave us a review. Click 5 stars. It helps the show more than you can imagine if you just take the time and do it. I know it doesn't seem like much, but it lets us know you're out there, so thank you in advance. Follow the show on Twitter at HighResPod, HiRespod. That's where you can keep up to date with what we're saying and who we're saying it to. We'll be back in 2 weeks with the heads of state, Dusty Summers and Jason Kurnovich. Until then, I'm Ryan Starr, and this is High Res.